Welcome, everyone. And I am looking at all the beautiful and familiar faces. If you feel comfortable, we'd love for you to come on camera. If not, that's okay as well. And goodness, just so excited to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Let me see, we see some people. I can see Laura Sandoval is smiling, and I'm sure that's because she sees Alfonso. And I see you, Coelho. Thank you for joining us from Mexico, Chihuahua, and Guad. Let me see. We have a ton of folks on our session today. All right. Well, let me see. We are going to go ahead and get started. This session is about demystifying sponsorship. And what do I mean by that? A tried and tested method for developing talent. So let's go ahead and dive in. Catherine, would you mind kicking us off with a poll?
Absolutely. You should see a screen popping up now. And what we're asking you is, what are you most interested about regarding this topic? Is it how to get a sponsor? Is it how to be an effective sponsor? Or how to deploy this sponsorship strategy? And I can already see, I'll share the results in just a moment, but oh my goodness, all the above is taking the lead. Spoiler alert. All right, let me share out these results with you all. And so we see we're about tied. How do we deploy this as a strategy? And also all the above. How do we get a sponsor and how do we do our best at sponsorship?
Love that. I love that. Thank you, Catherine. And then let's let me just move that slightly. Let's follow through on what are our objectives for today. The first thing is we want to provide you with some insights and tools that you can use to leverage sponsorship. And we're going to do that through a lot of storytelling. The second thing is, how do we demonstrate how sponsorship can empower your future leaders? And then, I know this is everyone's favorite, right, is how can this be a competitive advantage? And how can this really deliver value? But let's go ahead in the chat. We have a lot of folks on the session, so we can't really open up the conversation too much, but I'd like to see what's in the room. What are you curious about as you think about sponsorship? What would you like to walk away with? Go ahead and hop in the chat. What are you curious about sponsorship? Catherine, I'll have you help me.
Absolutely. I think everyone's just formulating their thoughts. So Sheila is sharing, she wants to hear how other organizations are leveraging this for leadership development. Dr. Motto, one of our friends from Northwell Health, is saying, what's the difference between mentorship and sponsorship? And same thing for Mary Marver, what are the nuances? Jim wants to hear, what are the examples of best-in-class sponsorship programs? And then how do we socialize this within organizations? How do we get it to take hold?
Love that. So yes, a lot of curiosity. And I know our panelists that are joining us are just listening to some of those comments and inputs. Let me go ahead and introduce you. We have Mandy Rutledge from Microsoft joining us. Mandy's a managing director at Microsoft, and she's going to share some stories with us, one story in particular. Bill Peters is joining us, who was the former president at Jabil and is now a partner in a company called Steadfast. And we have Alfonso Martin Del Campo, who's the vice president at Haltech. But actually, Alfonso and I have known each other for many, many years, and he's based in Guadalajara. So that's who you have with you in the room today. But let me push us forward. Why does sponsorship even matter? One of the things that we know when we talk to leaders, and it can be in any organization, is we're having trouble finding the right people. We're struggling with how to develop the bench. We're not sure how to create this culture of accountability. We're managing significant change. And how do we retain A players? Out of all of our research, these are the things that come up time and time again. So that's the problems that organisations and leaders like you are facing. But then where does sponsorship play? For those of you that are familiar with the McGuckin group, you know that we have this 6B method. The first one is, how do I build my internal talent? Second is, how do I bind the talent I have? The third is, how do I buy and acquire talent? The fourth is, how do I boost my high potentials? And the fourth is, how do I borrow? That could be acquisitions. And then the last one is bridge, which is, do I bridge somebody out of the organisation or up or along? And here's where sponsorship can play. If you're looking to build internal talent in your organisation, you're missing out if you're not leveraging sponsorship as a strategy. If you're looking to retain some of your key employees, the bind, leverage sponsorship. And if you want to figure out how do I promote people, leverage sponsorship. I actually like to pause here, and I'm going to pull Bill Peters in here just for a moment. And it's this idea of, why does Audrey care about sponsorship? What is it that Audrey really cares about? And, the why for me is the very personal experience that I had in my career. For those of you that know me, you know I left school at 16 and went to work in a factory. And you also know that 25 years later, I was at the C-suite of a $30 billion organisation responsible for 250,000 employees' development. And often the question I get asked is, well, how did that happen? And what I will tell you is I had 3 sponsors in my career. The first sponsor I had was when I was in Scotland. His name was Roddy McPhee. And I said, Roddy, I've been asked to go to Florida for a job, but I've never been in the US before. And he said, come in, shut the door. And he got a piece of paper and he drew the org chart. And he said, this is the CEO of where you're going. This is the Vice President of Operations. Here's Bill Peters. And he went through everybody. But he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call them and I'm going to tell them you're coming and I'm going to ask them to get time with you. And so we're now, Dr. Amato, we're now starting to answer this question of the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? A mentor will give you advice. Sponsors actually make it happen. And so that was my first experience of sponsorship, but I didn't know what it was called then. My second experience with sponsorship was with Bill Peters. So Bill, let me have you hop in and tell the story, set the scene and tell us about the problem and what we did together.
Yeah, so, Jabil was kind of a unique company in the fact that we grew so fast. I started there in 1990. It was about 120 million in revenue with about 1,000 people. By 99, we were a $2 billion company. By 2006 or 7, we were 10 or 12 billion. And as Audrey said, heading into 2020 timeframe, more like 30 billion. So crazy growth. And most of my background was in operations. So I had exposure to a lot of our plants and our people. And I was pretty outspoken about our need for leadership development, kind of from 95 to 05, especially when I think we grew at a compound annual growth rate of greater than 25% over that time. And, although the company was doing well, we were stretched. We were pushing people. There was a lot of folks being moved up fast, just out of necessity because of growth. And you start to see that there's cracks in the culture, that we're not promoting good leaders, that we're not spending enough time developing them. And, I had met Audrey along the way, and we had talked many times, and I knew she just had a passion for this. She saw this. And she was one of those people that, folks migrated to Audrey. She had a great vision of what she wanted to do, but she was also comfortable where people could come in and tell her what's going on. And what I found pretty quickly was, she was although not a very large person, she was a spitfire, right? So she was not afraid to tell me, hey, this company needs to fix these areas with people development or we're going to implode. It's not going to continue to work. And, that was building out observations that I was seeing. So I actually approached our CEO about, we need to focus on leadership development. We had tried professional HR guys that came in with a long background, and it never really caught fire at Jabil. It's a little bit of a show me culture there. And so we started talking about it. I moved over to human resource and human development. I sat down with Audrey. I said, let's talk through this. Tell me what you want to do. What do you think? And she started talking about, what she thought we had to do. And we tried to talk about a process, right? And she had great vision for the process. I think I had a good feel for what would work and what would resonate with our culture. And we worked together, to kind of figure out and build out this process. And it was just so interesting because, as we built out the process, we decided that, springing something on the organization that hadn't been done before is difficult to do, right? Everybody knows something new. And especially if you feel like, oh, I've got to focus on this, it's not related to building product or growing revenue or customer service. It's something, the soft skills area. And so it's tough to get buy-in to it. So we had to come up with something that was really good. And Audrey just had so much passion and vision about what she wanted to do and how she could build out this process. And I knew really for it to work at Jabil, it had to be connected at the board level, at the CEO level, at the COO level. And we really needed to do that. So, I saw somebody who had a vision. I spent a lot of time with her. She was just a sponge for information. She had her ear to the ground with the organization. And it was just really exciting to work with somebody like that. And when we got a process, we decided that, we're going to move forward and just start taking this process forward without really endorsement, from the CEO at this point. We thought we're going to show him as opposed to ask him how we should do it. Because I think we both felt pretty passionate about it. So I let her run with this. She built out an organization. She created some amazing tools. She was great at showing and testing and developing these tools. People started getting excited about it that were involved in it. You could see it was going to catch fire. And it was just really cool to be able to, I remember that. I'll never forget the day we walked the CEO into what we called our human development room, where we had a bunch of stuff around all the walls. And he didn't say a word for 20 minutes. He walked around the room, looked at all the content, looked at everything that was going on. And he was just stunned. He was just really stunned. And it was a moment of pride for me to see what Audrey had done and how she developed this process. And I tell you, for me, had we not done that, I don't know that Jabil would be successful as it is today. Because we were at a point where we had some folks that were getting business results, but they weren't good leaders. And that's going to kill our organization. I think it'll kill any organization, but especially Jabil, because our culture was so important. And just having somebody like Audrey who understood all that, connected the dots, built out a process. She wasn't afraid to ask for critique. She took criticism. She adjusted. And to see her kind of grow this as a grassroots process that became very professional. I mean, we showed it to every customer we could show it to whenever they came into town, and we got huge accolades about it. And many customers tried to copy a lot of the stuff that we were doing. So having that kind of impact in the organization, and then really seeing it turn into sponsorship. Because for us, we looked at who are our high potential people, who are our best performers, who's got potential to do more. And yeah, we made sure they had mentors. And then we had regular talent development meetings where we got senior leaders in a room and we talked about giving up our best talent. This person needs to do something else. They can grow and expand beyond what they're doing today. And it was not only expected that you would let people go to move on to do something different, but you really needed to do it. And the CEO was very active in those discussions with us because he stood behind the process 100%. So I think we can come from a spot here about a story that worked at Jabil. And, I have no doubts or no surprise that she's taken this into the McGuckin group and made this just a fabulous process. So we'll talk about some of the examples today, but yeah, that was my background with Audrey, and I was proud to be her sponsor and help her do what she did because she contributed a lot to our company.
Well, Bill, thank you for being so generous. Goodness, big heart from Heather Otto. But here's one of the things we like to do at the McGuckin Group is we like to link and label. And so for Dr. Amato, I know you had a question about what's the difference between mentors and sponsors. And I want to call out some of the things that Bill never mentioned. One of the things Bill didn't mention is we were actually in a conference room creating the process, trying to figure it out, and we had a meeting the following day with some key people in the organisation. And Bill probably doesn't remember this, but I got a call from my mum in Scotland to say your brother's been in a car crash. And actually he had attempted suicide and he had been in a car crash. And so Bill said, get on a plane, get home, don't waste any time, and we don't care about anything else, and we'll change the meeting. So what I want to say about that is sponsors lead with empathy. Sponsors have real relationships with the people that they're sponsoring. And I think that's one thing to call out. You can't fake sponsorship, right? And you'll learn more about this as we go on. The other thing I wanted to point out is Bill had positional power. What that meant is he knew people in the C-suite. He could push things through that I couldn't push through at my level, right? And Rashan, there'll be things that you want to push through that maybe Jane Ann can push through at eBay that you can't. And that's okay for us to leverage those relationships. So those were a couple of things that I wanted to point out as Bill told that story. Yeah, powerful. Catherine, I'm going to rely on you to see if there's any comments that you want to pull out of the chat before I hop in here.
No, I think everyone is taking in the stories. We have Rashawn just saying the same as what you just echoed. It's a very powerful message.
Yeah, so let's look at this mentorship versus sponsorship and along the value chain, right? The first is really a mentor, and that's about, giving people advice, and it's very private. There's not really that much at stake. The second way we can support, remember, we're going after these high potential employees, people we want to bind, people we want to develop. You can be a strategizer for them. It's sharing insider knowledge about how to advance, especially if you're more senior. We have some really senior people in this call. We have, we have CEOs and we have executives, and how can you be a strategizer? This third one is connector. This is about advocating publicly, making introductions. That was what Bill was doing for me along that journey. Inviting people to meetings. The third one is opportunity giver. Seeks out high visibility projects or roles and, asks people to do presentations. We're going to talk about that with Alfonso. And then sponsor. This is the most publicly committed, and it's at the higher end of the value chain. And it's really when meaningful, rewarding relationships have been developed. And it's over time, and it's through authenticity. And, what Carla talks about in some of her other work is performance currency and relational currency matter. What do we mean by that? In the performance currency, you have to be checking, is somebody going above and beyond? Is somebody really knocking it out the park? Is somebody really doing amazing work? And if they are, seek them out. And then the relational currency, and that's this piece around you have to develop relationships. It can't be a transactional relationship, which is why this is not a strategy you use for every single person in your organisation. Chris, I see you, and I know you're always on our sessions from Analogic, right? This sponsorship strategy is reserved for your high potential leaders. This is for folks that you've got your eye on, that you really want to focus on. But let's hop into our panel conversation, and stories matter. What I'm going to do is, Mandy, I'm going to ask you to kick us off. Mandy, of course, is joining us from Microsoft. So, Mandy, would you mind jumping in and sharing your story?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. Thank you for having me, Audrey. Nice to meet everyone. I am Mandy Rutledge. I work for Microsoft. I'm on my 13th year working at Microsoft, and my current role is that I am managing director of our sports and media and entertainment business in North America. So I've got a super fun gig, and actually, how I got here is as the result of an active sponsorship. So I'm happy to chat with you about that, Audrey.
Yeah. So tell me, what was it you were struggling with? Give us share the experience. You were stuck in your
Yeah.
career.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is from the outward appearance, I wouldn't have appeared stuck. I knew inwardly that I felt stuck. So I was in a fantastic role at Microsoft. I was running a global partnering organization across telco, media, and gaming. And I was quite comfortable and had a wonderful team that had no turnover. And so from the outside, this was we were a high performing team. It was looking pretty great. And at the same time, I knew very much so that it was time for me to evaluate kind of what's next. Because in my experience in my career, when I'm that comfortable, it's just time, right? It's time to go do something different. But like most people, I'm not, a huge fan of let's go shake everything up and change everything right now. So I needed to be encouraged a bit about that. And so we've got a summer kind of fiscal year kickoff meeting. We call it Microsoft Start. And I was out in Seattle last July and sat down with two of my sponsors. And I've been really, really fortunate to have more than one sponsor. And I'll take just one moment, Audrey, if okay with you, to kind of delineate a couple of things at Microsoft and how we think about this. And I'm coming back to some of the questions in the chat, River, that I hope this will be helpful. Everything starts with leadership priority on culture. And so when Satya Nadella became our CEO, it was really his very first priority. And I was here when he was not CEO, and I've been fortunate to be here while he is CEO. And it is the highest priority he brought to the role, believing that culture and an effective, positive, healthy culture would drive business outcomes. And I agree with that. And so when we talk about thinking about this, what's the most important thing? We have to be anchored by leadership on culture. Within that culture, at Microsoft, we've got a very high priority on people who manage teams to model, coach, and care about those teams they manage, including career development. And so I heard somebody talk about earlier, how we think about talent. As a manager at Microsoft, I think about recruiting great talent. I think about coaching great talent, caring about them, yes, of course, with empathy for much more than what's happening at Microsoft, but what's going on in their lives, but also exporting great talent. That's part of it. And so mentor and mentee relationships, we think about them as active partnerships. It's kind of a coach that may or may not be in your business. By the way, it's also the employee's accountability to seek them out, because if you're not investing in your career, who is, right? So there's an accountability factor there. It's a manager's responsibility to certainly support, that search in a mentor. In my experience, my mentors have been, best mentors have been the ones that give me the hard feedback. It's really easy to get into a cadence with your mentors where it's like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? And that's great too. But my best mentors earlier in my career were the ones who would call me out. And I had one of them call me out in this last example I'm sharing with you, which was, you need to think bigger. And so I sat down at Microsoft Start last July in Seattle, coincidentally, with two of my sponsors who said the exact same thing to me. They said, you know what your gap is, right? And I said, I do, but I didn't want to admit it. My gap was leading a team that was a direct sales team. I loved being in the strategy side of our business. I loved being in the partner side of our business. I knew it really well. I had not carried a bag or a direct sales quota in my entire career at Microsoft. So fast forward a few weeks when I acknowledged that they were right. And one of my sponsors actually introduced me to the vice president that I work for today and said, there's this job coming out of New York. It's responsible for a super fun space. I had some sports and media background. Would you be willing to, if I introduce you, would you be willing to talk to this VP? And I said, of course. She's super respected at Microsoft. And now my sponsors are holding me accountable to go, search for kind of that next step. And so, long story short, here I am. And I really view it as one of like the greatest opportunities and kind of blessings in my career, because left to my own devices, I may have stayed a little bit longer, and I forgot how fun it is to learn something completely new, how distinctly uncomfortable it is at first, and how satisfying it is when you get to the other side of, knowing, hey, I can do this. So I'll take a breath there, Audrey, and ask you
Yes.
if there are other questions.
No, that's great, Mandy. And what we're really trying to do here is give people perspective. So you're coming from the perspective of somebody being sponsored. And that's so powerful for sponsors to hear in the room, right? What is it like for somebody who could be stuck? And I like to talk in bottom lines, but what I love is, and here's the impact. You're running one of the largest, most successful areas of the business, and you're killing it and you're knocking it out the park. So thank you for sharing that, Mandy.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah, one of the things I always like to say about sponsorship is it crosses industry. What I mean by that is this is not exclusive to one industry. The other thing it does is it crosses demographics. So it's not exclusive to one demographic in an organization. And then my lead in to our next speaker is it crosses geographies. One of my favorite places to work is Mexico, and we're going to have Alfonso join us on stage. And Alfonso is perhaps known as the grandfather of leadership and talent across Mexico, and I know that we have some of his leaders on this session today. But Alfonso and I have known each other for a couple of decades, but we became reacquainted. A couple of months ago, and I said to him, "Tell me about this idea of sponsorship, Alfonso." And he told me a few stories, but I want to dial in on one particular story. And Jose Coelho is joining us, but I would love to have Alfonso, before you tell us the solution, what was the problem you were facing?
Well, the problem that I was facing was that when we moved to Guadalajara, there was a scarcity of people. We didn't have enough leaders. We didn't have enough people. All competitors, all JBL competitors came and are still here in Guadalajara. On top of that, we have OEMs, large OEMs, so AT&T, Philips, Motorola, here in Guadalajara. So there was not enough talent in Guadalajara. 50% of the staff was from Guadalajara. 50% of the staff was from other places, including other countries. So that's what the problem that I had. And then we acquired Tijuana plant. We were building Chihuahua plant. We expanded Guadalajara plant. And then there was an acquisition of 2 plants in Brazil, one in Belo, one in Manaus. So people was a problem for me. And in one of the visits in Belo Horizonte, I was talking to Jose and taking into consideration that I have this problem with lack of leaders with all the expansion that we were having, and having Jose, who was a general manager of a French company and then JBL. He wanted to have experience managing a larger factory. He speaks French because he was working for a French company. His first choice was France. Is there a possibility in France? No, there was not. France was small. So I told him, look, there is one possibility. If you are willing to move to Guadalajara, and instead of being general manager, being the manufacturing manager under a general manager, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And then you will be able to work with a large number of people in a company that is growing. And at that time, we have 500, 700 people. We were growing to 3,000. We have built another building. So it was expansion, big expansion. And he said, yes, I will go to Guadalajara. And we agreed that he was going to be the manufacturing manager of Guadalajara for 3 years. So he came to Guadalajara for those 3 years. Now he has been back and forth, but he has been more than 20 years in Guadalajara. He had a combination of having the leadership expertise, because he was leading a French company. He was a leader in a French company. He was leader in Bello. And he also had the technical knowledge. So he came to Guadalajara, and he's a people's guy as well. You know, he gets along with people. He speaks Portuñol, which is a mix of Spanish and Spanish, but he was able to get along with the people, and he was well received by the people. So he did a very good job in manufacturing. Then he moved to Manaus as the general manager of Manaus, larger plant than Bello. Then he took Manaus and Bello, and then he took Mexico, all the plants in Mexico, and then he took some plants in the States as well. So it was a very successful story. And then he left the company, and he became the general manager of Plexus, and now he's the vice president of Plexus in Latin America. So it's a good example of how a person grows in the company and outside the company. And,
Yes.
you know, he was able to develop a lot of talent in the Guadalajara plant and in Mexico.
Yes.
And
And
Brazil.
thank you, Alfonso, but let me do some linking and labeling for our audience. And so this idea of talent is not always right in front of you. It can be outside of one location that you're in, but you have to be looking for it. So you have to be searching for talent. The other thing that I want to link and label is Alfonso knew that Jose Coelho was a high performer. And the third thing is that Alfonso didn't say is they've become dear friends. And I think Coelho asked you to come to his house and have steaks with him. So I go back to this relational currency. It really matters when you build relationships. Yeah. Thank you, Alfonso. Bill, I'm going to have you take us home with one other story, and then just a quick summary on some key takeaways for folks on the call.
Yeah, sure. So, Audrey's mentioned, keep your eyes open. Again, as senior leaders, I think the biggest responsibility we have is to identify and develop talent. And, one of the examples that I have is part of my job as president of the company was I managed our largest account, which was Apple. Most of the production was done in China at that time, and I spent a lot of time over there. And it was interesting because there was a young planner there, and her name was Yo-Yo. I don't remember her last name, but I just remember sitting in meetings with her and just watching her operate, right? So she would get demand from the customer. She would end up having to put production plans together. She would work with, we sent the parts to a downstream supplier who would do final assembly. So she worked with that partner, and she would make sure that this thing all flowed. But it was amazing ramps. So you're talking about iPhone ramps every year. So for us, it meant that we had to hire 50,000 people every May and June to get through the ramp of, through November. And then we would reduce that down again. So it was massive increases of business in a very short period of time, 4 or 5 months. And, so getting this demand was right, or you end up with far too much inventory in the chain, or you're short inventory and you're disappointing customers. So it was a pretty big job. And I was watching her in these meetings. She would get the demand. She would just question why all the time. Why are they doing this? This doesn't seem to make sense. And let me give you one example. When they first came out with a matte black phone, if you guys remember the aluminum phones, right? But the matte black and shiny black, Apple believed the shiny black was going to outsell it. So they were giving us demand triggers of ship us, 2 to 1, ship us the shiny phones versus the matte black. And Yo-Yo was looking at this and saying, hey, I can't feed our partner enough parts on the matte black ones because they're just running out all the time. And so you had the marketing and sales side wasn't really talking to, the true customer side of this. And she was asking the questions, and, she would come back and say, look, I've analyzed this doesn't make sense. And it was just really interesting to see how she would, question everything that was going on and asking why. And I thought, this is pretty cool. And then we would go through and have always ramp issues, right? Brand new product, massive ramps, 50,000 new people. And she would work so closely with manufacturing to understand what they were truly capable of, so that we had good manufacturing plans and we weren't making promises we couldn't keep and things like that. And I just noticed somebody who saw the big picture, was really looking at why things were the way they were and questioning them. Her biggest gap that I saw was a bit cultural, right? She was a Chinese female. She was not comfortable talking in front of people. She was not comfortable talking with customers very much, because in her mind, we were a bit subservient to them. And it was just building her confidence. So spent a lot of time with her and said, Yo, these are great questions. This all makes good sense. And by the way, if we bring this up, we're going to help Apple because they want this demand to be right. So we started having meetings. I started including her. I would drive the meetings. She would support me with information. Eventually, I would have her do more and more of it. And so, it got to a point where she could command those meetings very easily. And long story short, she moved on to actually take over the entire commercial relationship for these parts, which was a massive part of Jabil's business. We didn't have any Chinese females doing anything like that. Apple loved her, and she became sort of an icon over there. And there was a number of great success stories where she became a mentor to other females in that organization. And we saw a similar path. So again, identifying, where is that raw talent? Do they really have high potential, which I thought she did? And then making sure that you see the opportunities and putting her into those opportunities, and then just really watching her blossom, And so that's an example, I think, of when you use perception, but it's not just about perception. I'll let you kick it back, Audrey, and we can talk about a little bit what comes after just perception.
Yeah, I'm going to let you flow right through. We have 5 minutes left on folks' calendar.
Okay.
And I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and share the perspective.
So Yo-Yo's story to me is one of perception. I saw it personally. I was able to do that. Again, I think every senior leader out there should have that antenna up all the time, everywhere you go, and look for that. But you can't see everything, right? So you need this process. You need to have a process that says, how do we make sure that we identify what the highest potential talent in the company is? You got to have a process to do that. You need to make sure that's an accurate process, that it's believed in, by the culture of the company, that people take it seriously, and that you're really identifying the correct people, because you don't want to miss that, right? And then how do you get folks to spend time with those people, mentoring them, talking about their future development? And then as an organization, how do you hold hands and really make decisions to move people around? It's not easy to do. If you got a great performer in one spot, it can get pretty comfortable to leave them there. You say, no, we're going to move this talent around. We're going to cross-pollinate folks. We're going to develop a better overall bench. So what is that process? That's where I think, again, Audrey helped us a ton at Jabil by developing that process. And I think the McGuckin Group can help you folks today if you don't have that. So for me, perception, process, and then closing it out for me, it's pride, right? Stay involved. If you start to get a high pot and you're moving them along in their career, and many of you in this call probably feel the same way, you're being pushed into the next level. Am I really ready for it? Can I handle it? Geez, there's a speed bump. There's a hurdle in front of me, because you're getting more and more responsibility. You need to be there for them. Put your arm around them. Make sure you're there to listen, because they're probably going to overcome any challenge as long as you stay connected and help them through it, right? And then pretty soon they gain their own legs, and they become, the mentors of the future and the folks that can sponsor others. So I always think about it as perception, process, and pride, is kind of the right way, I think, for a senior leader to think about this entire sponsorship topic.
Thank you, Bill. And I think my favorite one is this idea of pride, because that really speaks to the authenticity of the relationship, right? This is not an HR process. This is a leadership process. And this idea of pride, this idea that Coel and Alfonso are still dear friends and having steak dinners at each other's house after all of those decades. You know, when I call you up, Bill, I only need to ask you once and you say yes. And so we've maintained our relationship over time. And so there's an investment to be made, which is why this is not a strategy for everybody. But as we close out, I'd love, Catherine, if we could have folks come in the chat just to say, here's the one thing that I'm taking away from this. Just the one nugget or the one aha or the one thing I'm going to consider implementing. You know, if you're an HR leader, you know, I saw Lisa on, and I saw Heather on, and I see Brooke and see some HR people. What can you do to get this into the hands of others in the organisation? And then if you're an executive or if you have people responsibility, is sponsorship a strategy that's being leveraged? Jose, is sponsorship being leveraged in Guadalajara and Plexus, and just love that. So thank you.
The first comment here from Dr. Amato, which is sharing the stage. You know, as a sponsor and as a leader, sharing the stage for those that you're trying to elevate. Spreading the word from Mary that you will only grow by growing others. Sponsors can connect you to the right experience, but they also bring you context to specific insight into your opportunities. Megan is saying she really appreciated the 3 Ps, Bill. So thanks for sharing that. Oh, they're coming in really quickly, so forgive me if I accidentally skip you. Rashawn is saying his takeaway is the responsibility to spend your currency when others are not in the room. Chris is saying, I can't wait for HR to create this process. Leaders who have high potential. Really, you know, we have to find a way to boost them and create challenging opportunities. Yeah, performance currency and relational currency also struck a chord.
Yeah. Well, Catherine, thank you. Thank you to everybody for getting on this session. We're going to give you some takeaways. We're going to give you access to some of our materials, some of the pieces that were inspiring, and we hope that it inspires you to go out there and either start living your best sponsorship life or encouraging others. Thank you to Alfonso. Thank you to Bill Peters, welcome. Thank you to Mandy, and thank you to all for joining us and to the team at the McGuckin Group. And we will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.